So it was Erev Yom Kippur, 2 days into my first week as a student at London City University. 2 weeks back and still readjusting to UK life following a gap year in Israel that had encompassed the First Gulf War, 40 Scud missiles, and a study program that myself and friends decided to interrupt in order to undertake volunteer service duties. I was walking down the corridor at City University that day, minding my own business, when I heard somebody and saw somebody chanting, "Socialist worker, socialist worker, buy your copy of the Socialist Worker here." I know now that that chap's name was Des McDermott, and he was a senior figure in the UK's revolutionary Trotskyist and virulently anti-Zionist political scene. And as I walked past him, with a kippah on my head, he interrupted his chanting, glared at me, and changed his refrain. "Buy the Socialist Worker," he said. "Learn about how John Major and George Bush are murdering innocent children with the support of the Jewish lobby. Buy the Socialist Worker." And glaring at me, he said, "Eliminate your murderous Zionist Jewish state." So I thanked him for the warm welcome to British campus life, shuffled off to my lecture, and not before glancing back and noticing him deep in conversation with what appeared to be a group of devout Muslim students congratulating him on confronting this first-year Jewish student. I wondered what they could possibly have in common with him. The next day, I saw one of those Muslim students plastering the campus notice boards with posters about the Nazi state of Israel, using imagery of the concentration camps. As I was a student in Britain during a wave of anti-Israel campaigning and hostility in the early 1990s. At that time, there were both far-left groups trying to boycott Israel and Islamist extremist groups spreading anti-Semitism. I found myself as one of the Jewish students in London that simply wasn't comfortable to just let us be attacked, and that wanted to challenge those ideas and wanted to fight back. So I contacted the Union of Jewish Students that day. Within 3 hours of seeing those posters being put up, I was having a coffee with the national full-time political organizer at UJS, enrolled in their political activism training. Within 2 weeks, I went on one of their Israel leadership courses. Within a month, I was a delegate to the National Union of Students Anti-Racism Conference in Britain, where Jewish students had to be evacuated due to threats of violence from activists associated with the Nation of Islam. Within 3 months, I was elected as one of 4 delegates from my university to the National Union of Students Conference in the UK. The other 3 were Des McDermott and 2 of his Islamist allies from that day. Within 2 years at City University, I ran an election campaign in which Mr. McDermott was defeated by a pro-Israel candidate in his bid to become president of the Student Union. Things started to change. I went on to take elected national leadership roles in both the National Union of Students and subsequently the Union of Jewish Students. But my story wasn't unique. I was part of a generation of UK Jewish student activists who became involved in advocating for Jewish student rights during a dark period in UK universities. Significantly, we were peer-led. We were trusted by the adult wing of the UK Jewish community to run our budgets, to make our own decisions, to set our own strategy, and to get on with the job. We campaigned, we made alliances, we exposed those who hated us, and we fought for the rights of Jewish students. We learned how to make arguments in the voice of public reason. We ran battles, and we turned the National Union of Students and UK campus life into a much more amenable environment. From time to time, we weren't afraid to confront the leadership of our own community when we thought they were getting it wrong, or to confront the Israeli embassy in London, as my good friend Gidon Meir will certainly testify to from his involvement in that period. Years later, actually quite recently, I had discovered from a former member of the Islamist extremist group Hizb ut-Tahrir that their leadership used to have a nickname for me. They used to call me Jeremy the Jew. I was kind of proud when I found that out. But Jewish student leadership for me led to a leadership role in the National Union of Students. Later on, I worked within the Jewish community on more diverse issues like restitution for Holocaust survivors at the Board of Deputies, and then as the spokesperson for the Chief Rabbi, Lord Sachs. Now in my role as Chief Executive of the Jewish Leadership Council, the question of developing future leaders is part of our organisations and my own personal mandate. I want to add at this point that I think it's not been said yet, but leadership's partly about role models. So I'm particularly proud to be sitting on this panel with Malcolm Hoenlein. Malcolm's one of the archetypal role models of Jewish leadership. In his nearly 30 years at the helm of the President's Conference, his probably more than he realizes, inspired a generation of Jewish leaders around the world with his unique ability to lead from the front and his particularly impressive ability to unify Jewish institutions and build wider coalitions to secure the political well-being of world Jewry. When we created the Jewish Leadership Council in the UK as part of the modernisation of our communal infrastructure and to further harness the effectiveness of our own leadership, Malcolm in the President's Conference was one of our critical role models.
So it was worth coming here after all.
I suppose I'm one of those people that originally found myself in leadership as a response to threats, external challenges. And as I said, I wasn't unique in that respect. Most of my generation of British Jewish student leaders from the early 90s are now my key lay and professional colleagues in leadership roles around the British Jewish community. So that was my route to leadership. And it's an effective one, but it clearly relies on a specific trigger. And obviously that's not the ideal. We cannot and should not, I think as Malcolm alluded to, rely on a crisis to produce the next generation of leaders. Leaders emerge with a variety of motivations, and people's routes to leadership affects their worldview and approach. And we need a balance. And of course, what would we do if there weren't any crises in the Jewish world? We were asked to address the question of what one or two steps or strategic interventions could be made to ensure the future of our communal leadership. And I think if we go back to the time when Yitro visited Moshe and saw him judging all of the people on his own, he suggested the appointment of categories of leaders of thousands, leaders of hundreds, leaders of 50s, and leaders of 10s. And if you do the maths and work that through, you'll see that more than 1 Jew in 8 was a leader of a group or committee. I think it's fair to say that that ratio has probably carried on ever since. In the UK, where our community numbers just over 260,000, it's quite astonishing to know that we maintain and sustain between 2,000 to 3,000 individual Jewish charities. So obviously it has a downside in terms of effective use of limited resource, but it also has an upside that we don't talk about enough, in that each of those charities generates activity and a cohort of leaders who play their own role in Jewish life in our community. And an effective communal leadership needs a steady supply of enthusiastic, inspired, and committed leaders. That's something we're working on at the Jewish Leadership Council. 18 months ago, we launched LEAD, a virtual centre for Jewish communal leadership across all sections of the UK Jewish community. It's an operational division of the JLC. It provides training, mentoring, and support at all levels of leadership. Critically, it's the leadership institution that's endorsed by the heads of every major communal organisation in our community. We may not agree about everything, but on this, we managed to build that coalition. One of our most successful programmes in LEAD is the Adams Science Development Programme, named in honour of a young British lay leader who was tragically killed in a car crash in 1991. This programme recruits each year 12 young professionals in their mid-20s or early 30s with a little leadership experience in the wider community. It's helped over a period of 20 years to produce leaders and leadership for a new age with its old and new challenges. Each year, participants in this programme are individually mentored by the most senior communal leaders in our community. And they all make time to do that. They take part in training, they produce personal projects, they have an international seminar currently held in Boston in partnership with CJP. And importantly, and maybe critically, they build up a group spirit as a community of future leaders. The programme's retention rate is incredibly high. Adams Science graduates are active throughout British Jewry, and many, in fact most, go on to take professional and lay leadership roles in the Jewish community for extended periods of time. The Adams Science Foundation recently marked its 20th anniversary, and it was there that the Chief Rabbi delivered his speech about the 7 axioms of Jewish leadership that Johanna referred to earlier. It's worth revisiting those. We have to start with taking responsibility. Number 2, he said no one can lead alone. Leadership is teamsmanship. Number 3, leadership's about the future. Before you can lead, you need that vision of the future, and you need to be able to articulate it to others. Number 4, leaders learn. Study makes the difference between the transformative leader and the manager. Number 5, leadership means believing in the people you lead. Number 6, leadership involves a sense of timing and pace. Transformation takes time, often more than a single generation. Leadership's stressful, and it can be emotionally demanding. To stand idly by and expect others to do the work is an all too easy option. The second model of best practice we have in the UK is the community of leaders approach, developed through something we called the New Leadership Network, established by the Jewish Leadership Council. The network was created with an eye to the next generation of lay chairpeople and senior trustees of our major communal organisations. Its members are in their 30s and 40s and are both active in their careers and on committees of major Jewish charities and institutions. The network organises its own events and programmes and has spent time developing a shared manifesto and a shared vision, articulating that vision of the future of our community. This programme's been successful, because several of its graduates and members have already, over the past 2 years, stepped up to become the chairs of Jewish community organisations and sit around my board at the JLC itself. In this way, we've achieved our own changing of the guard in our community, but one in which the new guard already has its own network of connections with each other, its own relationships with each other, and a default position of working together in collaboration and mutual respect. Our experience with the NLN teaches us that building a community of leaders like this is one of the most effective ways to keep people committed to Jewish leadership. Research we recently conducted into our community's main organisations about a year ago told us that at the time, women comprised only a fifth of senior trustees of UK communal organisations and a quarter of the membership of our elected democratic body, the Board of Deputies. For this reason, we conducted a commission on women in Jewish leadership to address this issue, to deal with the gap, and to strengthen our community by addressing a gender imbalance that meant almost 50% of our potential future leadership was simply not in the game. And we found that often the barriers to leadership that existed inside organisations themselves, whether because of the slow turnover as leaders makes it harder for new people to get involved, or because not all organisations pick their leaders solely based on talent and effectiveness. So as some of my colleagues on the panel have said today, to ensure effective communal leadership in the future, existing organisations and leaders need to learn to make space by changing recruitment processes, to avoid unconscious and indirect discrimination, by encouraging new leaders to come up, and sometimes, perhaps unless your name is Shimon Peres, by stepping aside themselves when the time is right. Most importantly, and finally, leaders must internalise the key imperative of leadership, nurturing other leaders. Looking back on my own experience, had the national political organiser of UJS not taken an interest in me and taken me for that coffee that day, a first fresh year university student getting agitated over a bit of campus rough and tumble, had he hadn't cleared his diary to have that cup of coffee with me, chances are that my own leadership path might not have panned out the way that it did. A few years on from that, when I became the national political organiser of UJS, the Union of Jewish Students, I had a call from a first-year activist in a place called Wolverhampton, in the West Midlands of the UK, who was experiencing some problems with a hostile BDS resolution on campus. Together with a colleague, we cleared our diary. We got in a car. We drove up to see her and talk to her and calm her and help her plan and strategise over coffee that evening. Against all odds, that resolution was defeated. That first-year student went on to play a national leadership role in our community some years later. It certainly convinced me that the formula works. Thank you.